Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final Alliance for African Partnership Public Dialogue this academic year. My name is Chinwe F. Young, and I'm an Assistant Dean in the Office of International Studies and Programs at Michigan State University. I provide oversight for our Global Youth Advancement Network, GYAN, a unit established to convene and connect youth and young professionals from across the globe, nurture their leadership and entrepreneurship capacities, and ensure they have access to the skills, resources, and networks they need to be effective global citizens. Today's panel discussion is a collaboration between AAP and GYAN, and will explore the topic Pathways to Resilience, African Youth and Africa's Transformation. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge all members of the Alliance for African Partnership on this call, as well as MSU's Associate Provost and Dean for International Studies and Programs, Dr. Steve Hansen. I would also like to recognize representatives from University World Press, our media partner. And of course, the more than 250 people who pre-registered and hopefully are all attending this webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. Please use the chat function to introduce yourself and the interpreter tab on the bottom of your screen to set your language preference, as we will be translating simultaneously from English to French. We have three amazing speakers today who each have 10 minutes to speak on a topic that has been provided to them in advance. At the end of their presentations, Dr. Jose Jackson Malete, co-director of the Alliance for African Partnership, will facilitate the Q&A session. In addition to the panel discussion, we will also be launching the Africa Youth Transformation Platform today. My colleagues, Dr. Kwame Yeboah, Dr. Amy Jamieson, and Dr. Richard Nkandawire will join us later in the program to share the vision and objectives of this platform, as well as a few of the initial activities that we hope to collaborate with you on. So now to the panel discussion. For too long, the narrative on Africa and African youth has focused on problems rather than potential, obstacles rather than opportunities, and restrictions rather than resilience. The much talked about youth unemployment crisis now features centrally in almost every discussion about labor markets and public policy in sub-Saharan Africa. We are all familiar with the data on the African youth bulge and the fact that 1 in 5 young people on the continent are without employment, education, or training. We also understand the vulnerabilities that have been created by corrupt governments, foreign and local, terrorist insurgents, and other parties, resulting in the widespread systemic inequities that now prevail. However, there's another, albeit less popular narrative. It is the narrative of rapid economic growth, which has led to 6 of the world's fastest growing economies being in Africa: Cote d'Ivoire, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Ghana, Senegal, and Tanzania, to be specific. It is a narrative of digital transformation driven by the African Union and with a target of 100% digital enablement by 2030. The narrative of innovative African higher education institutions like the University of Pretoria and other AAP partners, of Aliko Dangote and his passionate commitment to the industrialization of Africa, of Strive Masiyiwa of Econet and his wife Sitsi Masiyiwa, who have dedicated their philanthropic giving to empowering orphan students to become agents of change, of Tony Elumelu and the Afro-capitalism philosophy and his support for African entrepreneurs. This narrative includes numerous stories about the innovation and tenacity of African youth themselves. Youth like Andrew Mupuya of Uganda, who was 16 and in Form 5 when he participated in a junior achievement program and won the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Andrew capitalized on President Museveni's announcement of the ban of plastic bags in Uganda and decided to participate in achieving this vision of a cleaner Africa. So he established an eco-friendly paper bag business with an initial investment of $14 Today, Andrew, now in his late 20s, owns a thriving company called Yeli Paper Bags Limited. Yeli produces over 40 tons of paper bags monthly for supermarkets, pharmacies, and other industries across Uganda. They also export Yeli products to neighboring countries. Andrew has trained over 1,000 people, raised 400,000 in investment in 1 year, and employs young innovators across all functions of his business. Andrew's is not an isolated story. MSU and AAP in particular have access to hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of African youth who are showing incredible resilience and innovation in the midst of extremely difficult situations. In researching about and chatting with our distinguished panelists, I found they all had similar stories, some of which you will hear when they speak. I am therefore excited to introduce these three committed, powerful, and influential African women who have been at the forefront of disrupting assumptions, defining new paradigms, and delivering cutting-edge programs that support and position African youth for transformative leadership. Our first speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Mwambulukutu, will be addressing the theme of youth and the future of Africa. Elizabeth is a development practitioner currently serving as the Regional Communications Manager for WaterAid in East Africa. Through her work, she's accelerating change and serving as an advocate and catalyst to ensure everyone everywhere has access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene by 2030. Elizabeth previously coordinated communications and knowledge management for USAID funded agricultural policy project in Tanzania. She also worked with the Investment Climate Facility for Africa, an agency focused on removing barriers to doing business in Africa. Since 2013, Elizabeth has been using her passion for storytelling and art as an instrument for shaping community narratives and offering an alternative approach to storytelling. She co-founded Hapo Zamani Zakele with the vision to place storytelling, arts, and culture at the center of the development agenda. Elizabeth is an economics graduate from the University of Sussex, UK, an award-winning and published photographer, a 2019 Mandela Washington Fellow, a Leo Africa Institute Fellow of the Young and Emerging Leaders Project, and also serves as the Vice Curator for Arusha Global Shapers Hub, an initiative of the World Economic Forum. It is my pleasure to now welcome Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Chinwe, for the great introduction and a really great appreciation to AAP for providing me this platform to share with you my perspectives on the topic at hand, youth and the future of Africa. I think I'll wait for the presentations to come up. Okay, thank you. So in my presentation today, I will be sharing my perspective on youth and the future of Africa. In terms of, can we go next? Next slide, please. The outline of this presentation will be looking at, starting off with an introduction, and then I will be touching on understanding the Africa that we want through the lenses of Agenda 2063. Then I'll be following that up with how we're moving from aspirations to action, and then ending off with the call for action. Can we have the next slide? Yes, so as we get started, I would like to ask one question to you. Okay, can we go a slide back? I would like to pose one question to you. I would like to for you to think of the African story, and maybe you could use the chat box if you have access to that, on what is one word that you would use to describe the African story? Can I have the next slide? And as you're reflecting on that, according to the African narrative, it is only 14% of Africa's storylines that are actually portrayed positively when it comes to global media. And for me, in my humble opinion, this misrepresentation or limited representation of African stories can block future opportunities of development for an entire generation. Um, Next slide, please. Well, I'd like to share this quote by Chinua Achebe, who once said, if you don't like someone's story, write your own. And in this context, I would like now to share with you how a few terminologies that I would like us to reflect on. First is the word resilience. And as you think of resilience, I would like us to have in mind poverty, disease, and conflict, and navigating around those. And the second one is transformation. As you think of transformation, consider it in the context of Africa's storylines or narrative, be it in the continent or globally. And then lastly, youth. And when we look at youth here, we looking at the UN's definition of youth, which is persons between the ages of 15 and 24. Next slide, please. Next slide. So now in terms of understanding the Africa we want, as we look at the Africa we want, I would like to make reference to Agenda 2063, which is a blueprint and a master plan for transforming Africa's economic, social, political transformation over the next 42 years. What the Agenda 2063 does, it builds upon a common vision of an Africa that we want by building on not only existing projects or interventions, but also current and future ones. And we've already started to see some of these taking root, including the recently launched Africa Free Continental Trade Area. And Agenda 2063 is deeply rooted in Pan-Africanism and the whole concept of Africa Renaissance. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are 7 aspirations or goals in which shed a pathway on how we will attain this common vision of an Africa that we want. And for the purpose of this presentation, I would like to spotlight 3, which will be followed on the next slide, which is aspiration number 5, 6, and 7. Can we have the next slide? Okay, so for the purpose of this presentation, I would like to shed light on aspiration number 5, which places an emphasis on moving towards an Africa that is strong culturally in terms of its identity, having a common heritage, shared values and ethics. Aspiration number 6, where an Africa is people-driven, relying on the potential of its people, including youth, women, as well as children. And aspiration number 7 on a strong, resilient, united Africa that is influential in the global market, but also as a partner and a player. Now on to the next slide. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we now move from aspirations to action? Now we've had a snippet of Agenda 2063. And to shed light on this, I would like to share with you 3 initiatives, starting with the grassroots level to city level to regional or Pan-African level. The first one is Hapo Zamani za Kale. Hapo Zamani za Kale is a Swahili term that translates to once long ago. Growing up, we used to be narrated, well, personally, I used to be narrated stories, delicious stories from my grandmother around a central community fire. And these stories often carried with them key lessons, values, but also knowledge about my culture and language and so forth. So this is what has heavily inspired Hapo Zamani za Kale, which is an initiative that I am engaged in my community. And the whole objective of this is to promote locally driven cultural preservation solutions through the use of storytelling. So use an example of what I've shared with you from how my grandmother used to narrate stories, and packaging these into different multimedia outputs, and one of them being children's storybooks, but also podcasts, animations, and so forth. And our approach to this, and the why, is the whole objective is to connect youth and having them introduced to African stories in the language of Kiswahili, and in the process also empower ordinary citizens as contributors of stories, their own stories, but also custodians eventually of the African story. And through this, we aspire that it is going to serve as a bridge for intergenerational African knowledge, culture, values, and lessons, starting from the grassroots, but also to a household, to the region, and even globally. Um, Next slide, please. And through the Hapo Zamani Zakale initiative, to date, we have collected over 100 stories in 5 regions across Tanzania, covering both rural and urban cities or villages. The second initiative that I would like to spotlight is the Global Shapers community, of which I am also a part of. Could we have the next slide, please? The Global Shapers community is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. And how it is organized is in the form of hubs. Another way to think of hubs is cities. So there are over 400 cities that consist of the Global Shapers. And I am a proud member of the Arusha Shapers Hub. Currently, I serve as the vice curator, which is also another way of it, is looking as the vice co-lead or vice president. And how we organize as global shapers is that we self-organize within our cities, our communities, through recruitment, through elections as well. And we aim to look at our own individual challenges within this context of Arusha and come up with solutions that use both a national context, but also we connect with the global network and also have best practices from what is happening in other cities. So in this context, other hubs, which I've mentioned, around 400. And to self-organize in our communities, we have 3 focal areas, which include of climate change and environment, education and employment, and the third one is equity and inclusion. But of course, in the context of cities, we also are able to come up with different projects that are outside of these focal areas. The next slide. And essentially through the Global Shapers, we as youth, we use this opportunity to drive dialogue, action, and change through the lenses of youth as agents of change. The third initiative that I want to share is around the Young and Emerging Leaders Project. So I started off with grassroots level, which is the Hapo Zamani Zakale, city level, which is Arusha Shapers, but it's also linked to the global. And then now Young and Emerging Leaders Project is more of a continental or East Africa level. So through the Young and Emerging Leaders Project, it's an initiative of Leo Africa Institute that trains young leaders to be leaders that are guided by the principles of empathy, clarity, knowledge, and volunteerism when it comes to looking at African solutions, African challenges as well. Some of the ways that we engage as fellows, which consist of at least 8 countries within the region, we get in dialogue through readings and writings, and we also do so to address some of the emerging issues that are happening within the continent, from issues of trade, to issues of creativity, but also we have sort of seminars, both virtually and in person in Uganda, that bring together the fellows to really dissect some of the challenges that are facing youth, but also the continent from a youth perspective. And one of the key things that I have benefited from being a fellow of the Young and Emerging Leader is really to look at challenges and what I'm doing in my community with a purpose, a lens of purpose, but also start to consider what is the legacy that I want to build or leave. And in doing so, also challenge my leadership journey and practice being the leader that I want to be, as opposed to waiting for that leader uh, to be. The next slide, please. All right, I would like to end this with a call to action. My first call to action is out to youth. And I would like to call upon youth to educate and invest in learning about the African culture, identity, but also embrace the heritage that makes you or us as youth truly African. Well, technically, in the youth definition of the United Nations, I am no longer a youth, but yes. The second appeal or call to action is to AAP and African universities, of which might be present here. I would like to call upon you to consider youth as your partners. Um, we need to engage youth, both in the co-piloting, but also in the driving seat as pioneers of the Africa that we want. A 15-year-old youth today is going to be retired by the time we realize 2063 agenda. So that's something that we have to consider from early on. But I also ask, humbly request upon you to also help youth to build their capacities and influence from where they are, be it at the grassroots level, be it at the city level, be it at the regional levels. And for the case of rural and urban youth, I appeal to you to give equal weight and center stage by integrating youth from those both ends as the bridge between this intergenerational transition that we're already seeing and we definitely are anticipating, but also in the co-creation of an Africa that is transformative, is resilient, and is sustainable. And to each and every one of us, I shared that stalking narrative of only 14% of African stories being positive. I believe we all have a role to play in unblocking and unlocking opportunities for future generations. So I call upon each of you to grab that pen and start contributing towards shaping the Africa we want, using one headline and one storyline at a time. And I would like to end with this quote by the former president of South Africa, President Mbeki, who spoke during who spoke during the Association of African Universities conference in 2005, pardon me. And the quote says, education has an important role to play in economic, cultural, and political renaissance of our continent, and in the drive for the development of indigenous knowledge systems. This implies that all education curricula should have Africa at their focus, and as a result, be indigenous in its grounding and orientation. To address the state of affairs, we need a distinctly African knowledge system. End of quote. I would like to end my presentation there and thank you for listening.
Sorry about that. I was having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Elizabeth, thank you very much for that very inspiring presentation and for your call to action. Our second speaker Zuwaira Yusufu is a dear friend and colleague who I have known for many years and whose passion for and commitment to building partnerships that transform Africa is well known and respected across the continent and beyond. Zuwaira is the managing director and CEO of the Aliko Dangote Foundation, the largest private foundation in Africa. In this role, she leads the foundation's efforts to improve health, nutrition, education, and economic empowerment outcomes for under-resourced individuals and communities in Nigeria and across the continent. In addition to her role at the Dangote Foundation, Zuwaira sits on several boards that address a range of issues that affect African youth, including SE for All, the Private Sector Health Alliance of Nigeria, the One Global Leadership Circle, the Center for Strategic Studies on Africa, and ABC Health. She also coordinates the Secretariat of CA COVID, the Nigerian Private Sector Coalition Against COVID-19. Her previous experience include country manager for the World Bank in Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and Sao Tome and Principe, working with the European Union on private sector development issues, and with Deloitte Ghana as a management consultant. Zuwaira will be speaking to us about strategic partnerships for youth empowerment. It's my pleasure to welcome her.
Thank you so much, Chinwe, for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. There are a few things that I wanted to start off saying. I mean, we all know, the sayings that children are our future, the youth is who we really, everything that we're doing now, the real either beneficiaries or people who will suffer from the decisions we make today are youth, right? If I take Nigeria, for instance, where I live, 43.7, almost 44% of the population of Nigeria, population of 200 million people, is actually aged between 0 and 14 years of age, which means that almost half of the population of Nigeria is 14 and under. This literally means that everything that is happening today will impact half of the population that we have right now. So why are we not engaging the youth more significantly? All of our projects that we run at ADF are aimed to support women and youth. It just so happens that everything that we're trying to do, the biggest problems that we're facing are really around the challenges that are faced by youth and women. So access to health, access to education, access to economic empowerment. These are the things that are challenging us on a daily basis. But I think the happier part of the story is how do we actually, in a specific and concrete way, engage with youth and manage partnerships with youth. So I'll start with the different things that we do, and I'll just say a few words about each one. I think the Q&A is always the most interesting part of webinars such as this, conversations such as this. So we've been sitting on the board of Junior Achievement Nigeria, which is one of the organizations that Chinwe used to run actually, for the past 16 years. And what Junior Achievement does, and we don't even really need the PowerPoint. I mean, I can talk to them. It's more interesting, and I'm not even speaking to them in order, so you can take the PowerPoint off. But Junior Achievement is really a program that is entrepreneurship when they're young. How to aspire to be self-sufficient and independent. This, we believe, will create more entrepreneurs within the country. So we support the organization, we fund them, and we really, really enjoy what we've been seeing come out of our partnership with Junior Achievement. Another one we work on is the other three programs are more, I would say, around people that are already working or active. So our latest partnership is with a German The German Manufacturing Association, the Engineering Association, the Youth Foundation, to provide technical training for youth in Nigeria. We just launched this last week. It is a way to train young people with practical skills to get jobs immediately. You know how in Germany, they have this dual track system, which has been the most effective, I would say, merger or joint venture between industry and academia, where they really teach young people to work directly with companies. Mercedes-Benz sponsored workshops. So they're learning on the real engines that they would end up working on when they start their active career. So we've started a partnership with them in our biggest factory in Nigeria, in Obajana, in the middle of the country. And really what this program is meant to do is expand the pool of technical trainees, people who can immediately get jobs. These are people who are already good at math, already good at physics, but they're aged between 16 and 24. So they finished high school, but they haven't gone to university and they haven't been able to figure out what to do. So this is one of those programs that we really believe in and that we're investing heavily in. We were very happy to see at the launch last week that the governor of Lagos, who was there, immediately jumped up and said that he wanted to have a similar program here in Lagos to empower even more youth to get them skilled for jobs. And the best part of that program is everybody doesn't have to end up being an employee, but they can also start businesses for themselves. So part of the curriculum includes teaching them things that would help them have their own business. uh, Two other programs that we support that are really about partnering with youth and helping them to take what they're doing to another level of leadership is how we support the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program. So this is something that was started by Klaus Schwab back in 2004. The idea being that, all these old and successful people get together once a year in Davos and sit around thinking about what to do to make the world better, but the voice of the people was never there. And so he thought it would make sense, which of course it does, to identify young people globally with high potential, bring them into a network and expose them to all kinds of issues, political issues, economic issues, business, put them together with the successful business people, sponsor classes for them in the best universities, so that these young under 40 people who are already active can really take what they've learned to the next level. And so Mr. Dangote thought that this was a really good idea and was, wondering why we hadn't done it before. The year that he started funding the YGL program, we probably had 2 African YGLs. And without the support of an organization, it means that the YGLs would have to go into their own pocket to fund a lot of these things, which would mean then fewer people, the expectation was that fewer people would be able to do it. So we have been supporting that program since 2014. And so far we have about 80 YGLs that are from Africa, from all over Africa. So it's not Nigeria specific. We pay for them to participate in all the activities that YGLs are meant to be doing. And so we don't help select them. We want them to be selected by a WEF. We want them to do their normal, very, very intense screening process. But at the same time, we want to make sure that they are reassured that they can bring more Africans in because there'll be funding to support them. So that's another program that I really like. And then the last one that I'll talk to you quickly about is, how the Obama Foundation launched their African Leaders Program 3 years ago in South Africa. So we were there at the launch, my boss and I, Mr. Dangote and myself. And what they're trying to do is create a new, more aware or more group, let me say a cohort of leaders who are really looking to make a difference, specifically on everything related to policy and politics in Africa. And so we're sponsoring that program for the next 5 years, and we will pay for the African leaders to be funded and to go through this training program that the Obama Foundation brings together. And so, we're doing our part. I feel really good about the things that we've been doing, but I always remember what Mo Ibrahim is always saying, that we have in Africa between our presidents and the majority of their population is made even wider by the fact that they're not necessarily even in tune with what younger people need. And so there's this to me recoups what Mo was saying about we need more young people to really be in politics and in policy and in elected positions and in fighting their way through. Nobody will ever give anybody anything, right? We don't have any examples of where things were just given to people. Oh, we think it's time to include young people, therefore let's just give young people positions, let's just give young people political posts. That doesn't happen. But the more equipped and ready young people are to step into these roles, I think gives us an opportunity to make sure that a lot of what they're thinking and what they want and their aspirations and wanting to do better and have an impact on their communities actually has a chance to be actualized. So this is just what I wanted to touch on briefly. And like I said, I always think the Q&A is the best part of these conversations. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm here for more questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Zuwaira, for that presentation. And I've always admired your focused and intentional approach, not just to your philanthropy, but to everything you do. So that's very consistent for what I've known of you over the years. I was looking at the chat and there's some really interesting questions. So be careful what you ask for. They're coming.
No, they should come. My kids are 19 and 21. And they are exactly this youth that we're talking about, and their ideas are very different from what mine were when I was their age. And I think this is the reality check, that as adults, we need to just recognize that, we need to make space for these perspectives. Young people today are not the same young people that we were when we were young. And I think, having fora like this where we can really have interesting exchanges with them is what I like and what I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And thank you for making the time for us today. Thank you, sir.
Of course, Chinmay, of course.
So our final speaker, who will be addressing the topic, Strengthening Entrepreneurial Ecosystems in Africa, the role of African higher education institutions, is Dr. Anastasia Mamabolo. Anastasia is an associate professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Pretoria's Gordon Institute of Business Science. She was educated as an optometrist, but after a few years working in that field, decided to get an MBA from the University of Limpopo, and then later a PhD in business administration with a specialization in entrepreneurship from Gibbs. Anastasia teaches international business, corporate strategy, entrepreneurship, and research design at the postgraduate level and supervises master's and doctoral students. In addition to her teaching responsibilities, she's involved in the Gibbs Project Orbit that studies and adapts African business and management strategies. As part of the Project Orbit team, she conducted interviews with more than 100 C-level executives in Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and Nigeria. Anastasia is also currently co-leading the AAP Youth Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Scoping Study in East, West, and Southern Africa. He has presented at numerous international conferences and published entrepreneurship articles in peer-reviewed journals. It is my pleasure to welcome Anastasia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Chinwe, for that wonderful introduction. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be talking in this seminar, and I look forward to our engaging conversations. Yeah, so my presentation is really on understanding the role of African higher institutions in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. As we know, entrepreneurship is the buzzword of today. Every country is talking about the importance of entrepreneurship, and so are the different actors within the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And this clearly positions African higher institutions as the leaders or people who are supposed to be driving the ecosystem. So next slide, please. So let us start by having an overview of the African higher institutions. So we have 1,225 recognized universities. So in addition to these universities, we also have technical colleges that are meant for vocational training, and I didn't include them in this presentation. I'll focus mostly on the universities. As you can see, we've got an almost equal number of public and private institutions in Africa. So let us also look at the kind of affiliation that they have. So we have public, and some of the public are for non-profit organizations. So let us move on, Lisa. Some of the institutions, so they are not for profit, and some are for profit. Lisa, yes, thank you. And 88 of them are for profit. So let us review the entrepreneurial ecosystem for some of the people who are not from the entrepreneurship space. So entrepreneurial ecosystem is really about the different actors who are working together to promote entrepreneurial activities. And this is on the next slide, Lisa. Yeah. So we do have multiple organizations that are all working together to promote innovation, to promote startups, to promote employee entrepreneurial activities, and also come up with success stories. I think Elizabeth spoke very well about the fact that we're not telling our stories from Africa, and we do have amazing entrepreneurs who've done so well that we need to talk about their stories. And this is really part of the entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I think they must be based on those success stories. And what we're really looking for in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is to have value, is to create value, whether it be around employment, improved well-being, it be around productivity. We all want our economies or our countries to really do well and impact the lives of the people who live in them or the lives of the society. So the entrepreneurial ecosystem is not complete until we reach the value creation. And this is the challenge in the African context, that how do we really articulate our entrepreneurial ecosystem to a point where we can say, yes, indeed, we can trace what the ecosystems are doing and relate that with the level of employment. Look at the entrepreneurial activities within the startups, organizations, or enterprises, and we can say, in fact, they actually contributed to the GDP. So we still have a long way to go in order for us to clearly articulate how the entrepreneurial ecosystems are translating into value. Thank you so much, Lisa. Let us move on to the next slide. Yes, you can just, yeah, thank you. So this is just the review of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Africa. As we know, entrepreneurship is still in the very nascent phase, and so is the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And if I was to think about the entrepreneurial activities in our continent that are really thriving, I can say that we are still in the nascent phase of developing the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So in some cases, they talk about, the ecosystems that are well advanced or that are mature. And from those mature ecosystems, then there will be other sub-ecosystems that are forming. But in our context, we are still very much in the nascent phase. And I know there is so much pressure for us to catch up with the world, but I do think that although there are challenges, we are progressing very well. And some of the challenges that we have are around the stakeholder engagement, the fact that we don't really have coordinated entrepreneurial programs where multiple stakeholders are involved, the human capital development. So this focuses on our institutions and the kind of entrepreneurial education that they have that is not really well developed, is still very much in the nascent phase. And when we look at the resources, there is this whole notion or debate that Africa has resource scarcity. So in terms of the support that we are offering to the entrepreneurs, and whereas the entrepreneurs in our context are faced with uncertainties. We know uncertainty is very important in entrepreneurship, but sometimes uncertainties can be a stumbling block to the advancement of small and medium enterprises in our context. So we still need to work more on trying to allocate resources that will empower our enterprises, our startups, and even established enterprises for them to become high growth ventures. And most importantly, institutions. So institutions, these are really around the regulations that we have and how they are created to cater for enterprises or entrepreneurs. As we know, entrepreneurs, they are a bit different from the general managers and other types of businesses because they are really innovative in nature. So they come up with innovations that most of the times are ahead of the regulations. So when they come up with something, you try to understand, do we have government regulations to support this kind of product or service that we have? Then you realize that the regulation is still lagging behind. So how do we create an institutional environment that will support this high innovative and high startup enterprises that are emerging in our context? And most importantly, Lisa, if you can just press enter there, is the notion that the entrepreneur must be at the center of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. That although we know that multiple actors need to interact, but a lot of times the entrepreneur is not part and parcel of the picture. The voice is missing. The voice of the entrepreneur is missing. And how do we now bring in the youth to be part and parcel of the voice? So Lisa, can we move on? Thank you so much. Yes, there we have it. So the role of the higher education institutions is really founded on the triple helix model, where we know that there must be an interaction between the industry, there must be interaction between government and academia, and most importantly, to promote innovation and entrepreneurship. From the academic point of view or from the academic institutions, how do we provide training that is relevant to entrepreneurs? How do we encourage research and development of new products, come up with really exciting innovations that will not just sit within, the wonderful libraries of our institutions, but they will get to be commercialized and everybody else can see these wonderful innovations. And I know that there are exciting things that are happening in our context, but we're not doing enough to commercialize all of those activities. And most importantly, we want all of the stakeholders to work together so that we can promote regional competitiveness, and not just to focus on regional competitiveness within the African context, but even in the broader African context where we can be globally competitive. So thank you, Lisa. Let us move on to the next slide. Yeah, so the role of African higher education institution is really important. So that is why AAP has embarked on this massive project together with MSU and University of Pretoria to understand the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the role of academic institutions. I know that we do have our colleagues here, Abo, Farai, I saw you, Tony, you are here on this call. So we want to really understand the kind of role that the African higher education institutions can play. So if you were to think about it in two ways: that we focus on the development and the actualization of the entrepreneurial opportunities or the startups, or have the entrepreneurial action. So a lot of times we focus more on just imparting skills and all of that, but they don't translate into action. So we have the catalytic role. So in this case, we're creating awareness. So this is the role. So the important part of promoting entrepreneurship. So how do we create awareness of entrepreneurship as a career option? I mean, when I was growing up, each time they asked me, what would you want to be when you grow up? I'd say a doctor, or a nurse or a teacher, but didn't really understand that one can be an entrepreneur. I used to see my dad do things growing up, but I really didn't understand what he was doing. So how do we now create awareness of entrepreneurship as a career option and supportive? So what kind of skills can the African higher education institutions provide to entrepreneurs, and how do we know that these are the relevant skills that they actually need? Because a lot of times you realize that there's a mismatch between what we offer in class and what people are doing. And that can translate into actualization and the outcomes. That the outcomes must really be about creating or developing entrepreneurs who, are for social change, are going to have social impact in their communities, and also on a national scale or national platform. And also knowledge production is one of the important roles of the African higher education institution. And this is where we talk about entrepreneurial universities. This is where we talk about academic spin-offs that we must really encourage to invest in our African higher education institutions. So can we move on to the next slide, please? So we do have success stories. So if we think about the University of, let's go, yeah, thank you. So if we think about the University of Nairobi, where they have a co-creation space where entrepreneurs can come and interact. Betha Center in South Africa. So this focuses on social entrepreneurship. And in Egypt, the American University in Cairo, they have this wonderful venture hub where they support entrepreneurs and they can provide them with money to start their business ventures. And we have in Nigeria, the Raw Project, which focuses on technology, really encouraging high-tech startups, to grow and to venture into new markets. And also in Senegal, where they are, the university incubation hub does not only focus on the students, but to the broader community. So these are some of the success stories in terms of what our academic institutions are doing to promote entrepreneurship. I mean, the list is endless, so I just had to select a few. So let us move on. And some of the success stories of what has happened so far is the fact that most of the graduates, when they get their qualifications, they're able to get employment and have some startup activities. And a lot of African institutions have started introducing entrepreneurship programs, and they can see that there is indeed impact on the social behaviors of the youth who participate in this project, because when they leave, they feel an obligation to make impact to the societies that they live in. Shall we move on? Thank you. So in terms of what the role is, we need to first focus on the entrepreneur. And I think this is a message that we're really trying to put across, that a lot of times we exclude the entrepreneur or the youth entrepreneur in the conversations that we have. So two things that are really important: to develop the entrepreneurial mindset, and even birth some of the myths about entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurs are born, and this is evidence of the data that we've collected, where people think that college dropouts, they make better entrepreneurs. Women cannot cut it in the world of technology. Agriculture is not cool. I remember this comes from one of the interviews that was conducted in Kenya. So we really need to change the entrepreneurial mindset, and our universities, I think they are well capable of doing that. And the inclusive bottom-up approach, how do we reach the youth in the rural villages that are not parts of the universities? And how do we also impart or empower youth in the informal economy? Thank you. Let's move on. In terms of the human capital development and the role of the African higher institutions, so we know that there are programs that are existing in the African higher education institutions, but we need to move a step further in terms of having specialized and tailor-made programs that will be aligned with the student stage of development. So a lot of times students would just get these courses and they would just participate, but there isn't really clearly articulated objectives or goals of those particular programs. And we need to introduce accredited specialized programs in entrepreneurship. I think some of the data that we've gone through, they talk about the fact that most of the entrepreneurship courses are at the certificate level, where you don't really have bachelor degrees in entrepreneurship. I know a couple of institutions, especially business schools, they'll have master's degrees in entrepreneurship, but there's a need to really formalize entrepreneurship education and have clearly articulated degrees around entrepreneurship where people can specialize in it, and transdisciplinary approach to entrepreneurship development. I think this is really critical, because when you look at the curriculum in most institutions, so they don't even have entrepreneurship. Whether you're doing medicine, whether you're doing radiography or any course, we feel that there must be a transdisciplinary approach where each and every department focuses on entrepreneurship, or they must have entrepreneurship as one of the compulsory module. So the teaching approach, so a lot of what is happening is that the information is very theoretical in nature. And we know that entrepreneurship is practical, where, you really need to ignite creativity, ignite innovation. And how do we design classrooms in such a way that entrepreneurs will be inspired to think? I mean, I can't wait for the classroom of the future, which we must start now, where you can create a space where people can just come in, dream big, and have wonderful ideas that they will actualize into businesses. So how do we incorporate experiential learning? How do we incorporate design thinking in what we are doing? And facilitators. So one of the roles of the African higher institutions is to have facilitators who are really trained in entrepreneurship. And I know this is one of the challenges, is who do you now bring on board to teach entrepreneurship? So are these just the teachers who have general degrees in business management, or you need entrepreneurs? But it's actually a challenge, because entrepreneurs are busy making money out there and impacting their societies. So this is another issue that the African academic institutions, they have to deal with. How do we now empower the trainers to teach entrepreneurship in a creative way, and not like when you teach mathematics or physics, but you really need to be thinking about the new ways of teaching. And I think COVID-19 showed us that we need to be creative, because students can't be, in class the whole day listening to Zoom and all of that. So we really need to be creative. The next slide, please. So, and another role which is critical, let's go back, Lisa, yes, is funding innovative and high growth ventures. So we do have young people with innovative ideas. You think about William, who designed a windmill for his community with very, very scarce resources. So can you imagine if William was able to get significant funding for the project that he had? I think he was going to be able to scale that. So one of the roles of our institutions is to really provide a funding, invite alumni to be part and parcel of the angel investors or whatever types of investors that we have, because I think we have so much wealth of information, but that is, not integrated, and so much capital that we can raise amongst ourselves. In South Africa or in Africa, I think a lot of communities will rely on mutual benefit and saving societies. So this is what we need to bring. We call them stokvels in South Africa, right? So how do we create youth stokvels that are targeted at entrepreneurship? And again, look at the meso and the macro level initiatives where universities can have crowdfunding platforms for the high growth ventures. So this is really exciting, because I think that our context is rich of so many opportunities that will result in high growing businesses. So next slide, Lisa. And yeah, the last point is bridging the gap between academia and entrepreneurial practice. And this emerged from the findings that we had. So how do we have multi-stakeholder multi-stakeholder, right? And cross-sector collaborations. So this is really adopting a transdisciplinary perspective. So how do you bring in an artist, a scientist, and a business management scholar or an entrepreneurship in one class, and they can have a conversation? So this is where we need to be moving to bridge the gap that we know already exists. And I think one of the important points that came from the data and that we're dealing with and some of the literature is the notion that we need intermediaries to facilitate the conversation. So a lot of time we're saying that there is a gap, but we don't really know how to close the gap. And in context where there are institutional voids, like our context, or some may disagree and say is institutional inadequacies. So that is where we need to have intermediaries who are going to help us, to close this gap. And part and parcel of closing the gap is to also have positioning strategies where we can allocate our graduates into small and medium macro enterprises where they can go and learn to be entrepreneurial. Next slide. Yeah, and as part of them learning to be entrepreneurial, so that is when we can develop the university exit programs, and these programs will be targeted for entrepreneurship. For example, final year students, every final year student must be put in an entrepreneurship course to prepare them for entrepreneurship and not necessarily for employment. And we know that there are, wonderful hubs that I've already spoken about, but how do we formalize the support structure for the startup? So this is one of the roles of the African higher education institutions that they need to formalize. And lastly, We need to work towards an integrated, next slide, please, Lisa. And lastly, we need to work towards an integrated approach where students would be regarded as the entrepreneurs and they would be at the core of the ecosystems that the African higher education institutions are doing. So for me, I think my passion and desire is to really have or to see a development of higher education entrepreneurial index that we can research on, that we can report on, that we can really use to see the longitudinal impact of our programs and all of that. So have the context-specific entrepreneurial education and models, look at the global markets to access partnerships and collaborations. And lastly, the university, industry, and government collaboration is an important element of how the African higher education can develop their own index that will be used to measure the impact of the entrepreneurial activities. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for this wonderful presentations, all three panelists. You've done a fantastic job with our session today. And we're going into the part of the program where we're going to engage with the audience. And we've already received some questions during registration and also and at today's session, we have some more questions. So I'm just going to throw them out. There are some that are specific to some of you on the panel, but I think they're mostly all general, where you can all choose, to speak to them. So one of the questions is, how can we improve youth pathways in terms of employment in Africa and paving way to young leaders in African economies? Do we have a panelist who's willing to touch on that? So I'll ask all three panelists to please share your videos. Anastasia and Elizabeth, please share your video. And so the question again is, how can we improve youth pathways in terms of employment in Africa and paving way to young leaders in African economies? Anyone? Zuera, perhaps you may want to start. You are on my left, on my screen anyway.
All right. So youth and employment is just like general unemployment, right? So yes, the proportion of young people who are unemployed might be higher than the proportion of, let's say, adults who are unemployed, but the causes and the solutions are the same. The biggest problem that we have in most of our African countries is that our private sector and our public sector together are not creating enough jobs to absorb everybody. So if we're looking at, say, the Francophone countries, which are more heavily administration focused, people used to go to university, get a job, and then they would really get a job in the administration. Those days have been finished for a long time. And so the more we can have a robust private sector, the more we can have governments who understand how to make the enabling environment favorable for business so that people can start companies and create opportunities for others, because everybody's not going to be the entrepreneur themselves needs to be able to hire people to come and work for them. So the easier it is for people to start companies, and the more the environment is conducive to this, the more jobs will be there. I don't know what other way there is to create a job except through a strong private sector. Without that, we are doomed to situations where it's about political favor, it's about working for the administration, it's about, just not really, unless you're connected to somebody, you can't really move forward. But then how many people we have more people that exist than connections that are available, no matter what country we're talking about. And so it's really about making business, entrepreneurship more easily attainable to people so that they in turn can hire more people. I really think that's the pathway. And that's whether we're talking about young people or older people.
Any other views from Elizabeth or Anastasia? Elizabeth, I see you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just complimenting on Zoera, I think when we think of a pathway, for me, I think of it as also the theory of change, or how we move from point A to point B. And looking at that currently, if we're talking about youth and the future of Africa, we have to look at youth as sort of the inputs, if I can call it that. By that, I mean looking at youth as the task force, as the job creators, as the decision makers, but also as the change makers. And I think that transition in between is when or where the role of academic institutions and the private sector, as Zuera alluded to, the role of those key institutions in nurturing youth. Whatever happens there in the middle, I think that is the pathway now to attaining the Africa or the future of Africa that is where industrialization is a reality, but also prosperity and a peaceful Africa. So I think it's having a clear theory of change to towards attaining the pathway.
Thank you. Anastasia, any thoughts?
Yeah. So thank you, Jose. I totally agree with my colleagues. And I'd say that another element is really around implementation. So I think that in our context, we do have wonderful policies that were designed. We do have frameworks, we do have structures in place, but it looks like we're having problems with implementation of those projects, that even though we can come up with fantastic models, so the adoption thereof is always going to be a challenge. So I think for me, the role of the intermediaries on whatever, that would be agreed as suitable to empower youth, we need strong implementation.
Thank you. Can I just ask all three panelists to keep your videos on during this Q&A session? Thank you. So a follow-up question that someone asked today is, so there was this part about the private sector and their role. So I think we've answered that. But one of the questions is, what has been the impact of COVID-19 in terms of engaging youth population in activities around entrepreneurship? Do you see that this has had any impact at all? And I will start with Elizabeth this time.
Okay. The impact of COVID-19 and engagement of youth population, the impact, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I would like to use an example from the aspect of water, sanitation, and hygiene. I've seen the active engagement of youth, but also through partnership with the private sector, in terms of engaging youth as champions or as ambassadors of hygiene change promotion. An example of this is also, through the creation of, be it cartoons, the creation of animation, but even radio dramas, as was the case for WaterAid Rwanda, where amidst the the lockdowns, youth actually, took initiative to partner and create radio dramas that sensitize and raise awareness within their communities on how to take preventative measures to protect themselves from the pandemic. So I think the pandemic has really, forced people, including youth, to think outside the box and really challenge themselves to come up with innovative solutions, from construction of hand washing facilities to to hygiene behavior messaging and so forth. So yeah, that would be my reaction to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Suera?
So in terms of opportunities, I mean, I'm thinking about some of the things that we've seen young people do and step up and take advantage of opportunities that the pandemic provided. So as Chinwe said in my intro, CACOVID is the private sector alliance that Mr. Dangote led to bring the private sector together to support government to address the issues related to the pandemic. So we, raised like $112 million. We bought testing supplies, PPEs, food for 10 million people across the country because the lockdown had, made a lot of people idle. And so within that, there were a lot of opportunities for us to identify vendors. So we focused on younger vendors who could supply and be more nimble. We also used a company called Kobo 360, which is one of our young, those amazing companies that came up with an amazing business plan and got funding from, I think it was Goldman Sachs, $30 million. They're one of our success stories of youth entrepreneurship here in Nigeria. So they're the ones who helped us do the logistics of delivering the food all throughout the country. We bought a lot of nurses' scrubs and uniforms, which we specifically sourced from smaller companies to give them a boost rather than the bigger ones. So I think there's been opportunities for us to be like selective in who we were giving contracts to and be deliberate about supporting younger people. It's even within the group, we have, if you can imagine all the Dangote products that are, cement, sugar, salt, they're wholesale products that we sell through retailers. And those retailers who buy from us and then sell to people are SMEs, right? Some of them are small, some of them are medium, some of them are larger companies. But we have quite a few of the smaller ones that are run by young people to whom, we give easier terms to have access to cement for them to sell and start a business also. So there's a lot of things that we're doing as an organization, I think, to give an opportunity for younger people, but definitely the pandemic has created a few that I know for sure opportunities for people to take their companies either to another level or to even start something that they hadn't thought was possible. And I think there's going to be even more opportunity for young people as the conversation moves towards how do we get more medical supplies actually manufactured in Africa, right? COVID made it clear that we don't make enough of our stuff here. If we're dependent on imports of everything from saline solution to vaccines, we're always going to be at the bottom of the list of who gets what. So we need to start producing a lot of our own things. And I think young companies and young people are the ones who will benefit from these, the new investments that are going to come around medical equipment and supplies.
Okay. Thanks, Suera. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up on that. Someone mentioned that you talked earlier in your presentation about, supporting programs like the YGL, etc. And they're just wondering, how can you be more intentional in terms of your seeking out youth, because maybe they feel that the WEF, might not be accessing all youth who have the talents, etc. And perhaps your organization could be more involved in terms of identifying youth to be engaged in those types of programs.
Okay, so the truth is, it's already very difficult to find the ones that are easy to find. You know how when you're trying to do something, you have to start with let me call it the easier or the lower hanging fruit, right? So the idea that we would put in place now like a rural youth recruitment program for programs like the Obama Foundation and the WFYGL is not, it's not realistic for right now, just because we're trying to find even the ones that are easy to find that haven't been found, right? So for instance, one of the young people who won or who was selected this year is a young guy called Dr. Abasi. And this young guy came up with a lab solution. There we go with the COVID thing. Came up with a lab, like a portable lab in a cabin, right? We bought two of his labs. Ondo State, another state in Nigeria, bought another one of those labs. And he's one of the biggest companies right now doing testing and supplying of lab services in Nigeria, right? He was one of the people who applied for the WEF fellowship, for the YGL program and got it. So we have people like that who, without the Dangote scholarship being there, wouldn't even apply. So where are we even looking for people in the rural areas? I'm sure we'll get there eventually. And I'm not saying that people in the rural areas don't matter, but I'm just saying the reality of life, everything that we have to do, we can't solve every problem, and we're trying to get as much as we can now. Let's identify as many young people with potential as we can right now before we take it to the next step of, going to areas that are more difficult to find, where there's not enough available internet, where people are just not as easy to identify. So that's just the honest answer.
Thanks. Thank you, Zuera. I'm just going to have one final question for Anastasia. And we only have 1 minute because we're running behind. Sorry about that. There was a question about what strategy can universities put in place to create the skill sets that are needed for young people to be more engaged around the digital enterprise. I think the fourth industrial revolution and all those current activities, what are we doing, African universities, to get our young people to be, having the skill sets there? Anastasia?
All right, thank you. Fortunately, I conducted a study on our preparedness in terms of 4IR and the skills that we are offering. So there is still a gap in terms of, the cloud skills. How do you teach that to the students? Problem solving, which is really aligned with digitalization. Coding skills, how do you impart that into your students? So I think we must really be deliberate in terms of universities introducing actual courses that students can participate in. So if we have courses around digitalization and those courses being taught using the digital tools and not necessarily in the traditional manner, because once you say to me, go and read about this without any practice, it's going to be a problem. So we spoke about the augmented visual reality. That should be incorporated in terms of teaching this digital skills where you can put students in a real learning environment. So I think it's really more than just teaching on the chalkboard, to really trying to come up with practical ways of teaching this curriculum on digitalization. My apologies.
Thank you so much. And I'd really like to thank all of you, the three panelists, for a fantastic presentation. You've really explored different avenues and different areas for us to think through further. I think this shows how much more is needed, and we want to thank you for your time today. I'm going to ask now Amy Jameson, Richard Makandawire, and Kwame Yeboah to come on now and take forward this next part of the program to the launch of the African Youth Transformation Platform. I apologize that I've stolen some of your time. Please bear with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jose, and I want to just take a moment to recognize all of the speakers today and the really impactful things that you've shared with us. I see a lot of quotes coming in from the chat saying how informative and quite engaging these presentations were, and I think that we will continue the conversation. And I think on that note, continuing the conversation is exactly what the African Youth Transformation Platform is geared towards. Last year, I'll just give you a bit of background. Kwame, do you want to go to the next slide? And I'll try to compress this. I hope you guys will stick with us for just a little bit longer. But last year, the Alliance for African Partnership and the Global Youth Advancement Network began to talk about how we might work together to create a platform focused on African youth and the issues that are most pressing to them. And through consultations with youth, faculty from across our networks and other stakeholders, we developed what is now the AAP GYAN African Youth Transformation Platform. But before we share the details of the platform, I want to provide a very brief overview of how this initiative fits into the work of AAP and GYAN. The Global Youth Advancement Network's main focus, as you can tell from the name, on global youth and coordinating research and international development activities related to the education, entrepreneurship, mentorship, and leadership of youth between the ages of 18 and 35. And they have established a broad network of youth and youth-serving institutions. The Alliance for African Partnership represents 12 member institutions. We are a consortium of MSU and 11 African institutions, universities, and a policy think tank. And has one of it has as one of its priority areas youth empowerment. However, the focus on youth and inclusion is a cross-cutting theme woven into our 5 priority areas of agri-food systems, water, energy and environment, culture and society, education, and health and nutrition. So we have a similar approach you can see across AAP and GYAN. AAP has 3 pillars: building bridges across sectors, disciplines, continents, institutions, transforming institutions and strengthening them so that they can be effective partners and carry out impactful work, and transforming lives, so in Africa and beyond. GYAN's approach focuses on convening thought leaders to share experiences and ideas that have positively impacted youth, capacity building at multiple levels, including at MSU and within local institutions in Africa, educational content in Africa and around the world, I should say. GYAN has a global focus, but and educational content development that is culturally relevant and appropriate to the language, literacy, and local realities of target communities, and utilizes participatory approaches. So AAP share a priority on youth and the principles that are listed here of accountability, equity, inclusivity, sustainability, and transparency. So you will see these approaches and the principles here woven into the African Youth Transformation Platform. Go ahead, Kwame. So what is a platform? What is this that we're conceiving of? We're looking at it as a community of practice to share knowledge and ideas, an umbrella to bring together existing youth-related work across our network so we can, amplify the work that's being done and disseminate, scale up initiatives, and a catalyst for new youth-oriented initiatives. Next slide, Kwame. We've identified 3 guiding principles for this platform. The platform will advance solutions relevant to Africa's context and priorities. The platform recognizes that African youth are not subjects of development, but actors in that development. And so will be co-created with youth and with faculty, AAP GYAN network partners, and other relevant stakeholders. So we really believe in this principle of co-creation. And number 3, the AYT platform strives to foster long-term equitable relationships among African youth, among our partners, and relevant stakeholders to facilitate knowledge sharing, collaborative research, and capacity building. Go ahead. So the goal of the platform, as you can see here, is to transform the lives of African youth and their communities by elevating youth voices and agency, co-creating an enabling environment for youth to thrive, and through entrepreneurship and community engaged scholarship that focuses on youth development outcomes. Next slide. Then I'll turn it over to Kwame.
Amy, thank you very much for that broad overview. And I also want to thank previous speakers for those insightful presentations. I think one thing that we all agree on is that any kind of transformation that Africa will experience is an intergenerational mandate, which will require young people working with the older generations to be able to come up with that change. So as we were thinking about the goals on how to advance this youth transformation platform, we came up with 4 main objectives that we seek to pursue. So the first of it is to elevate youth voices and thought leadership. And we seek to do that through regular consultation with youth and other relevant stakeholders to, first of all, co-create all the activities that we will be pursuing under that platform. We also hope to be able to create an environment where through something like youth summits and convenings where young people will be able to share ideas and their concerns will adequately be discussed. And it is also envisioned that we'll be able to create a youth-led and a youth-driven publications where youth voices will adequately resonate in those kinds of publications. The second objective is to expand capacity building opportunities. And this one, we hope that we are going to be able to enhance capacity of young people as individuals through interventions that we will pursue, but also look at institutions like youth-serving institutions, like higher education institutions that are serving these young people to ensure that they have the capacity to adequately address the concerns that youth have. And then the third objective is to facilitate research collaboration among those in the AAP network, the institution AAP network, and also with youth themselves. So we talked about research, not just for youth as just subject of research, but also co-creators of that. So how do we get young people to also participate in the research that are of concern to them? And along with that, we hope to be able to create an enabling environment where some of the knowledge that we are generating and the best practices could be shared across the network so that each of us will be working with the most cutting edge and evidence-based approaches to addressing youth issues. And then lastly, we will hope to be able to mobilize resources through building strategic partnership, even with funders, and also support grant-seeking activities and proposal writing, as well as even highlight some of these young people that are doing wonderful work in the community so that others will be able to see them, and then will also serve as role models for others also. And I'm pleased to also share that we have already begun some work under this initiative and making some good progress here. So these are some examples of activities that are ongoing. So in terms of the elevating youth voices, as part of the larger effort in ensuring that every aspect of this platform activities are co-created with young people, we hosted a youth leaders consultation in October last year. We brought together youth leaders from 9 AAP focused countries, and they helped to review the goals and the objectives, as well as provide inputs on some of those focus activities. We had followed that up with consultations with faculty also in October, and the insights that we gathered from that is helping to shape the activities that we seek to pursue under this platform. As part of that, elevating youth voices too, I know there is ongoing project under the Global Youth Advancement Network. We have the Global Voices Essay Competition, as well as the Global Voices Dialogue that emphasizes youth voices in the as a platform to be able to emphasize youth voices. Under the capacity building opportunities, I will highlight two activities that is ongoing. We have a project in Ghana and then in Tanzania that is called the Young Innovators in Entrepreneurship and Leadership Development, a yield project, which I'm one of the leaders of, that is capacitating young people that are operating agricultural and food systems to be able to take advantage of opportunities that is occurring there through collaborative research, capacity building, and also convening. And there's also another initiative which my colleague Lebs Maleta is leading in multiple countries, in Botswana, Ghana, and in Tanzania, that is on enhancing youth entrepreneurship and academic outcomes through sports. In terms of research collaboration, you heard of the work that Dr. Mwambulukutu presented, which is a scoping study on entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa, which is part of a larger effort to be able to help capacitate African higher education institutions to effectively create an environment where the entrepreneurship mindset could be developed among youth. We are currently also exploring partnership potentially with the MasterCard Foundation to conduct a needs assessment of African higher education capacity as part of a larger effort to be able to support African higher education institutions to deliver on their mandate in preparing these young graduates to be effective change agents in their community. For the resource mobilization standpoint, there has been some seed grants that have been aimed at fostering collaborative research and partnership. A typical example of this has been the PIRA grant, the Partnership for Innovative Research in Africa grant, which had a strong focus on youth transformation, which is ongoing. And there is also been a number of proposals that are out there. A proposal for Mozambique to build career service centers in Africa, and a proposal also focus in Kenya to expand economic opportunities for youth in Kenya, which we are all hoping that will yield fruitful results and will be funded in the coming days. So now, as we do this, we know that our excitement can not yield fruits without your support. So we definitely need your support to make this happen. And you can support us in multiple ways. One of the ways is we encourage you to join the AAP Bridge digital platform, and you could create a profile and indicate your interest in youth. We hope that we'll be able to use this particular platform and the profiles that you are going to share there to create a faculty database, which will be the basis for our faculty mentoring program to mentor youth, as well as develop links that will allow us to be able to link, bring faculty together to do research on youth issues. You could also share ideas on programs for youth development, or even areas where you believe that there are gaps that we need to be able to fill in, and potential interventions. We're looking for those ideas. So please share that with us. I have my contact number, my email address here, as well as the email address of AAP. Please feel free to contact us directly if you have some of those ideas. And then we lastly want to encourage you to participate in the platform activities. We thank you for making time even to be here with us today. And we hope that you will actively participate and help us to recruit young people, help us to recruit mentors, and even help us to identify those star individuals that we could highlight, and also participate in a number of initiatives that we'll be doing. Thank you very much for this. And at this point, I would want to hand it over to Professor Nkandamwere, who will officially launch this platform for us.
Well, thank you very much, Kwame. Thank you indeed to the panelists in helping us to define more deeply on pathways that we should collectively pursue in harnessing the African youth demographic dividend. Indeed, I think, as we all know, a number of our leaders within the continent have been a number of our leaders within the continent have been actually speaking to the need for harnessing this African youth dividend, demographic dividend. I think this dialogue is a continuation of the calls that we've heard from our African leaders in pursuing the agenda of harnessing the power of the youth. As we've been told in this dialogue, we need to tell the story of African successes. There are thousands of young people across the continent who are drivers of innovations and technology in such areas as technology, in the arts, politics, but their stories tend to be buried. And we believe that we as institutions of higher learning can assist in documentation of some of those success stories. Related to the same, I think, based on the discussions that are emerging here, I think is the need in highlighting pathways to success for youth entrepreneurship. What are the key sectors where young people are succeeding? I believe that our institutions of higher learning have a responsibility in providing the necessary training in youth entrepreneurship more broadly. And such training, as we learned, should be made available to all students. And I think we might wish to consider, within the context of the platform we're about to launch, to consider cataloging where such training exists in our own institutions of higher learning. And I think from the conversations, again, it's become evident, indeed, even based on some other conversations we've had, there's need for a regional and continental, even global platform to facilitate exchange of knowledge and best practices to promote youth entrepreneurship. And indeed, we're very delighted that from MSU and the African universities that come under the consortium of Alliance for African Partnership, and indeed with the support of GYAN, a new platform has been created as explained by Kwame. So my role this afternoon is on behalf of MSU more broadly, as well as the Alliance for African Partnership and GYAN. My single honor is to formally declare the African Youth Transformation Platform formally launched. Thank you very much for participating in the dialogue. We appreciate your presence and your contributions. Thank you.
Jose.
Thank you so much, Richard. we've come to the end of our program, the dialogue, as well as the launch of the African Youth Transformation Platform. We look forward to engaging with everyone in this platform. This is an important issue for Africa, also for the AAP and for GYAN. And we are going to be off air for a couple of months. We'll come back again in another few months, perhaps around August or September, for the next set of AAP public dialogues. And we look forward to joining you all again with all these very insightful discussions about and for Africa. Thank you. Bye.